This is Political Psychology, and I'm your professor, Dr. Patrick Stewart. In this lesson, we'll be dealing with the emotions in politics. Emotions can be seen as verbalizations of what is currently happening inside us, and they may be seen as occurring both inside and outside of our awareness, and reflected in our nonverbal and verbal behavior. Finally, they certainly can be seen in politics. But ultimately, we are dealing with human behavior, something we humans have been interested in for millennia. To quote the ancient Grecian philosopher Plato, human behavior flows from three main sources: desire, emotion, and knowledge. Arguably, when we talk about emotions as nonverbal and verbal behavior and feelings, we're talking about desires and emotion. And knowledge is why we go to school, to learn how the world and other people work. Thus, if we're interested in being successful, the words of Dale Carnegie, who was born closer to us in Missouri and grew up in poverty on a farm before writing his classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, are useful. When dealing with people, remember you are not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion, creatures bristling with prejudice, and motivated by pride and vanity. Maybe equally pessimistic are the words of H.L. Mencken, a noted news writer from the last century who wrote, "The one permanent emotion of the inferior man is fear, fear of the unknown, the complex, the inexplicable. What he wants above everything else is safety." Skepticism may be warranted about people, but if we're going to be skeptical, let's make sure that we do it from the knowledge of individuals' desires and emotion, which means understanding how people label emotions in the first place. When it comes to labeling felt emotion, three scientific approaches have predominated in the recent past. But one thing to note is they have not only been influenced by theoretical understanding, but have also been affected by statistical technologies and how they're measured. These major theories are the valence model, the circumplex model, and the basic emotions model. The valence model, with its feeling thermometer approach, is perhaps the simplest approach of all. It just measures how cold or warm you are towards someone or something. It has been used extensively in political science social survey research because it is so easy to measure. The emotion circumplex model was an attempt to address this oversimplicity of the valence model, which missed an awful lot of subtleties in describing and measuring human behavior. This model has been used extensively in psychology and political psychology, and it goes by different names and different rotations, but the basic idea is that there are two dimensions. In this slide, we have Russell's circumplex, in which the two major dimensions are valence and activation. The first dimension, valence, considers how unpleasant or pleasant an individual feels towards something. The second dimension is how activated one is toward an object. In other words, how much physiological arousal or alertness there is in response to something. You have increases in the sympathetic nervous system with greater or less physiological arousal and appraisal of how beneficial or not something would be for you. These dimensions answer the questions of would you approach or avoid something, and how much effort would you put into approaching or avoiding something. A slightly different approach saw connections with the limbic system in the brain. Jeffrey A. Gray's behavioral inhibition system and behavioral approach system, the BIS and the BAS, was more rooted in neuropsychology by linking behavior to the septohippocampal system. In simpler terms, the lower parts of the brain and how they connect up with the upper parts of the brain, and has been connected with personality, moods, and of course, those fleeting emotional states that drive us. However, there is a major problem with the circumplex approach. While language is clustered on two dimensions, it doesn't differentiate between different behavioral strategies that might be used. Specifically, anger, disgust, contempt, and fear are seen as closely related to each other when considering the circumplex, but they imply very different behavioral strategies. That does not mean that they are not related to each other. just that they are separate emotions. And that is what the basic emotion theory, also known as the discrete emotion theory, posits. For instance, when a person is angry, there is distinctly different behavioral strategies that follow than if they were fearful. As a result, if you see someone displaying anger, especially for the one causing it, their behavioral patterns are relatively predictable. This is why, as we move towards considering facial displays and nonverbal behavior more generally, basic emotion theory is an attractive alternative approach to understanding how people feel, communicate, and self-report their emotions. There are problems with basic emotion theory. The first is that we rarely see the specific configurations of the face that have been used to study the 7 plus minus 2 emotions. I know this because I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours studying political figures in their natural habitats, often frame by frame. The second, more involved problem with basic emotion theory is the feed-forward or path dependency attributes given the choice of the basic emotions. First, in this model, happiness is the only positive emotion represented. But we know from personal experience that other positive emotions occur, and they include such things as contentment, joy, interest, pride, pleasure, and awe, alongside many other positive emotions. Related to this is that the more we know about ourselves and are able to name these emotions, in other words, using our interoception of what is going on inside our body, the more different emotions we feel, and the more varied we can be in our behavioral response.